How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
There's a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Yeah, I introduce him as a special guest every week.
That's hilarious. I love that.
There's only a few ways Todd's special. Ba-doom-doom. That's good.
It's gonna be an episode.
Well, hello and welcome to Cinema Shock. It's that podcast you listen to sometimes when you want to know way too much information about a movie that you like. That's why we're here. If we're going to give you more information about another movie that you like. I am one of your hosts, Gary Horne.
Co-host Justin Bishop. We are joined today by two special guests. One is writer, comedian. I didn't have a clever title for you this week, Todd.
He's fuckface.
Fuckface. Writer.
And then the other special guest is asshole.
Writer, comedian, fuckface, Mr. Todd A. Davis. Welcome back to the show, Todd.
Thanks
and
for having
joining
me,
us
guys.
is our favorite asshole, Miles. Welcome, Miles Griffin. Welcome to the show, Miles. This is our first time we've ever had a guest that wasn't fucking Todd on Cinema Shock. So we thank you for joining us this week.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for not
I always
fucking
lose track
me.
of which name it is now because we've gone through. This is the third name, right?
Oh, Todd, I see what you did.
Yeah. This is the third name. For
Slice
this
of Fried
podcast.
Gold, Psychotronic, and now Cinema Shock, correct?
Yeah, this is this is like if we are in like a Pokemon. This is like the final.
You're in the artist formerly known as stage.
Is this like the final form? Like Pokemon's go through three stages.
Okay,
right?
so you're in your Princess Symbol stage.
I don't know what that means, but I'm going to take your word for it.
When
I don't know what it would take to make this podcast too much of a nerd show for me to be a part of, but we're close.
Justin lost me at Pokemon.
Have you never heard of Pokemon?
I have played and beaten the most recent Pokemon game, so I'm there.
God.
He understands. So Miles is the co-host of a couple of other podcasts.
Yes.
The More You Nerd, which came back from a lengthy hiatus a few months ago, right, Miles?
Yeah, we started back in March after about a 8-month hiatus. And
Because starting in March, you had nothing fucking else to do.
well,
like
no,
the
if you
rest of
listen
us.
to what was it the end of the year episode or the It Follows episode? I can't remember, but the last time I was on, I mentioned that we were going to be coming back in March.
Yeah, you had it planned. It just worked out.
Yeah,
Where you had plenty of time.
Miles, did you cause COVID-19 strictly for
What I
your
do in my free
podcast
time
scheduling?
is it's hush hush.
And then your other show is
Cosmic Crit. It's an
Cosmic Crit.
actual play Starfinder podcast. So if you play like Pathfinder, which is kind of a D&D like, then if you're more into science fiction, that's what we do.
Well,
It's a
Todd's
live
on
play.
D&D.com or some
D&D
shit.
Beyond. Todd's on D&D Beyond. He tells us
D&D
every
Beyond.
episode. Miles, tell our listeners a little bit more about The More You Nerd, as people who may not have listened to you on our previous show.
Well,
might
so
not
for
know.
the first about 8 years of the podcast, The More You Nerd was a show that was dedicated to expanding your nerd horizons by engaging in listener challenges. So someone that would be a big fan of something that we hadn't covered would challenge us to watch it. Since we come back, we have decided to do things a little bit differently because, well, one, we started to, the challenges dried up a little bit, but also we kind of wanted to take our show in a different direction. We want to do more themed stuff because, we have been doing things that people had suggested to us for almost a decade, and we wanted to kind of start doing things that we wanted to do. And so we've started doing these themed months. Most recently, we tried to do a Quibi send-off. And
he tried.
Yeah, well, so here's what happened.
Did Quibi just disappear before you could finish it?
Yes, that's exactly what happened. Quibi ended all trial periods as well as subscribed months. If it was before December, the whole thing was if your month was up before, I think, October 31st, you didn't get the month of November.
Oh,
So when
bummer.
they said December 1st was their cutoff date, they meant that basically nothing would go past that. So even though we did a trial, we could not subscribe for the rest of the month of November. So we were kind of screwed out of the last 2 weeks.
I wonder what's going to happen to all that Quibi content, because I did a free trial like back in October, actually, because I wanted to watch some of the Sam Raimi's 50 States of Fright.
That's a fun show. I really
And
enjoyed it.
what I watched the first few of them, and I really thought it was cool. And I hope that content lands somewhere else.
I mean, it's got to be Shudder, right?
I would hope so. I mean, that seems the natural fit.
I mean, to be perfectly honest, the reason I want...
I imagine they'll piecemeal it and just kind of, all right.
Yeah, but
wants
that
this
show
one
in
and just sell 'em
particular,
off.
like I want to land somewhere.
I just want to continue far
And Mary
enough.
Herron did a show,
I want to see it far enough so that we can see South Carolina's episode.
Yes.
That's all I want to see.
which I don't think they've produced that one yet, right?
No.
So hopefully somebody will pick up the current series and then continue on. Otherwise, we're just the fucking Sufjan Stevens of doing horror anthologies, right?
But no, we've done like in September we did syndication September, where we did syndicated shows of the 1990s.
Like
so
Xena?
we did Forever Night, Thunder in Paradise, Mortal
Thunder in
Kombat
Paradise?
Conquest.
Hulk Hogan?
Yes.
Oh man, I love that show.
Also Jack Lemmon's Son, which is
How does it hold up?
not well. And William Shatner's Tech War.
Dude,
Oh, wow.
Tech War, what? I didn't even know there was a TV show based on Tech War.
There's
I remember
4
the show.
TV movies and then a full season.
The Tech War novels were a
Yes.
formative moment for young Justin, because
There's
this
some
was
fun
like
stuff in there.
I was in the age where I was getting into Stephen King and stuff like that, so I started like reading adult books, and I was a big Star Wars nerd as a kid, and I saw these novels at the library written by William Shatner, Tech War, and I picked them up, and they're fucking nasty. Like, he's a fucking pervert.
Oh yeah.
and 13-year-old me was reading those, and I was like, I am an adult now. I am a man after reading these books.
So we did that all as what we called a pilot season. And what we did was we had our listeners vote on which show they wanted us to do a deep dive in and do the entire, at least first season, if it had one, or the entire series, if it was a 1-season show. And I'll tell everyone here, Forever Night won. So we're going to be doing all of Forever Night for the month of January and part of February.
Oh, fun. Okay, cool. Well,
But it's just fun to go into stuff like that, especially both Drew and I, we initially were going to do our Rebirth of the More You Nerd as a show dedicated to syndicated television. But our biggest roadblock was that Baywatch Nights is not available anywhere. And that's like our great white whale is Baywatch Nights.
That's the one. Oh man, my mom and dad were in Hawaii during the filming of Baywatch Nights at one point. There's a photo of my mom with Jason Momoa from 1999.
Wow.
On the set of that show. That she is very proud of.
She should be.
All right, well, let's get into this. We'll plug your show again at the end of this podcast so people
you're
can
good.
know where to go find it and listen to it. But we're going to get into week 2 of our series called Black Christmas, where we are exploring the Christmas set films of Mr. Shane Black. Week 2, barely Christmas, but there's some Christmas in this one, but not maybe as much as the other weeks that we're going to discuss.
Well, be careful, or Santa Claus is going to put something in your stocking, Justin.
Satan Claus, I think.
Satan
is who we're
Claus,
talking
Satan
about
Claus, that's
there.
what I meant to say. Yeah. Fuck you.
You
Step on
fucked
my
up
joke.
your own joke, Gary.
I was joking with my girlfriend Krista, who you guys just talked to, that you guys most of the time have me on if a movie is featuring Danielle Harris, because this is my 4th Danielle Harris movie on this podcast, or on y'all's podcast. I've done Halloween 4, 5, Urban Legend, and now The Last Boy Scout.
Well,
That is
really, the reason is,
unintentional.
Miles, is that it's the only way for me to not sound as creepy as I'm going to. Without you.
Well, here's the thing. I texted you and I said, which one
I
of
know.
these movies do you want to be on? And you said The Last Boy Scout.
In all caps.
You are choosing your Danielle Harris path.
Oh, I understand that. It's amusing to me. Well, especially because
That's pretty
Gary,
funny, though.
If you joined the Cinema Shock Discord, you would have known that Gary posted that the Halloween 5 house is on sale, and Gary and I have talked about purchasing it so that we can play Michael and Jamie on the weekends. You know, he was Uncle first.
who's
That's
Jamie?
why. That's why. It's funny. I also sent it to our friend Jeremy, and
Wait, if
he
it's
said
Halloween 5, and can we get Gary to play Jamie so he'll shut the fuck up?
Wow. What? Where did that come from?
You know, I'm just
He's drinking.
enjoying myself.
Is Miss Danielle? Is she on social media? Have
Yes.
Oh
reached
yeah,
out
Oh,
to her?
yeah.
horror gal on Instagram.
You won't
Okay.
regret
Yeah,
that.
she was
You should
recently in
follow her.
Greenville.
Jesus, Todd.
Yeah,
Anyway, what I was gonna say before Justin was just a dick was that I told our other mutual friend Jeremy he should go in with us on that house, and he said he will only put money in if the child's coffin comes with it.
Oh man. So let's get into it, guys, for this week's episode. So last week we talked about Lethal Weapon, which was the kind of the movie that put Shane Black on the radar for Hollywood. Like, it's the movie that made him a name. And after the success of Lethal Weapon, he was invited back for the sequel. And he wrote the first draft of the sequel, Lethal Weapon 2, with the help of the novelist Warren Murphy. But he would end up leaving the production over disputes with the studio because they felt that his version of the script, which Black has called the best thing that he has ever written, they thought it was too dark. And it did, in I guess the studio's defense, it did end with the death of Martin Riggs. And for what was becoming a successful franchise, you know, that's kind of bad for business. So they didn't want to do that. Joel Silver and the studio did not want to kill off one of their main characters when there could potentially be a Lethal Weapon 3, Lethal Weapon 4. Hell, there may be a Lethal Weapon 5 one day. Who knows?
Maybe
So
they'll make a TV show.
Yeah, well, shit.
Oh, yeah,
well,
I forgot about that.
a TV show starring Damon Wayans.
Yeah, there you go.
Back as Murtaugh.
So instead, the next Shane Black script to be produced would be one that he actually started developing. He had the idea for around the same time that Lethal Weapon was in production. And that was Tony Scott's The Last Boy Scout.
This ain't no game, Flash.
Joe Hallenbeck's a private detective who's run out of luck.
If you touch me again, I'll kill you.
Jimmy Dix
I like Prince.
is an ex-quarterback who was thrown out of football.
Another tragic tale of wasted youth. You're nobody. Shh. Don't tell anyone.
They were trying to clean up their acts
You vacuum, I'll dust.
when they got dragged into the dirty world of sports corruption.
So you're gonna bribe some senators to legalize gambling?
Now,
Son, we're going to a ball game.
they've got one shot
What am I gonna do? Point it at the bad guys and shoot!
to get the goods on the bad guys.
This once, I would like to hear you scream. Play some rap music.
If they don't kill each other first. Bruce Willis, Damon Wayans, The Last Boy Scout.
Danger's my middle name. Mine's Cornelius.
Can I say
This is after the Monster Squad, correct?
Yeah. Monster Squad came out around the time that Lethal Weapon
Oh, okay.
did.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually wanted to mention that because I mean, we're gonna, if I may rant for a moment, I would like to do the opposite of what Justin wants and talk for a second. I want to dig in a little bit about Shane Black here because I tried to look into him, and the only thing we know for sure is that he's not like the kind of guy who is afraid to separate or seclude himself. And I shouldn't say completely seclusion because Justin knows, I mean, reportedly the partying that we talked about last time continued. But the thing is, it's like, I think I kind of jumped the gun a little bit last time because by the time that Lethal Weapon sold and everything, I found these cool articles in like New York Magazine and LA Times from 1990 and about screenwriting and that sort of stuff. And he'd sold Lethal Weapon and had just gotten to Last Boy Scout, and he was still living with the pad of guys that we talked about last week in a bungalow. It was like 4 roommates. But to quickly recap some of that and add some context, I discovered when we last left Shane Black, we discussed this mostly, but Fred Decker was actually in the middle of working on a Godzilla treatment at the time he helped Shane Black in by introducing him to his agent, David Greenblatt, which I thought would be interesting and fun for Miles and for all of us.
I've got a book on that, actually, the Lost Godzilla films.
Oh, nice. And so basically important because like Hollywood's super into this sci-fi stuff or monster stuff. And that's how he sold to David Greenblatt to get Shane Black on. And Shane Black comes in with Shadow Company. But then, you know, like you talked about.
Which, by the way, we didn't mention this last time, but I should say Shadow Company never got made. We did mention that. But you know who flirted with making Shadow Company? Mr. John Carpenter.
Nice.
Wow, man.
Yeah, I didn't know this either until I was reading some stuff or watching some Shane Black interviews. He actually talked a lot to John Carpenter. And he referenced in a few different interviews a lesson he got. One of his best lessons he got was from John Carpenter, saying that Carpenter told him, he's like, scene doesn't matter. Get your characters in the right place and make it real, make it psychologically pleasing. He's like, that's the most important thing. He's like, you can have two guys talking to each other in a plain white room, and it could be the most terrifying thing in the world that an audience will see if they believe what they're seeing these two guys talk about. And
did he tell him that after he wrote this script?
I don't know. You know, I don't think I ever got like a time frame on when he said that, but
I was very, very excited to revisit this movie because I do love Shane Black and I loved this movie growing up. But if you had told me this was Shane Black's like first movie where he was kind of finding his voice, I would have believed you. Like, this is not like 3 movies in Shane Black to me. This sounds so amateur.
I think you're going to find out a lot more about that as this goes.
Yeah, it's not entirely Shane Black's
fault.
But
that's fine. I'm happy to hear that.
I liked the idea of us digging into Shane Black a little bit for Black Christmas. That's why I'm recapping all of this stuff.
That's why I'm stoked to be here as a guest, because I didn't have to do research for once like we do on my show. So like I just watched the movie and kind of came in, even though I'm a fan of Shane Black's work generally. I just watched The Nice Guys for the first time and loved it.
So good.
Well, so 20th Century Fox got him in there, and they just hired him on to write this movie. I finally found it. It was called The Last Warriors, and it was like a sci-fi epic. That's what they wanted him for. But it was during this time he had that script for Lethal Weapon. We covered all of this last week, but basically it starts to heat up and it gets to the point that he can leave making this sci-fi epic and go do Lethal Weapon. But now, to be fair, going back to the party part of it, to hear him tell it, he doesn't describe his parties as wild as everybody makes out that they were. He says it's like my parents were there half the time. There weren't topless starlets everywhere. But when you hear every single other person talk about them, that is a different story. Anyway, the main thing about all of this is that because of this, because of his relationship with Joel Silver, this is when he got time to go do the acting role Justin brought up on Predator. And so he goes and he does the acting role on Predator. And admittedly, from even another producer there, Todd Davis, they just brought him there because Davies says the idea was hatched. Let's hire him as an actor. When he's stuck in Mexico, we'll have him rewrite. So that was just going to be in his downtime.
That's such a Hollywood idea.
Oh, yeah. Shane Black is the most dicked around by Hollywood. Probably not the most, but he made a lot of money. Anyway, although technically not much of that happened on Predator, it was there where he supposedly, like he said, all he actually did in Mexico was hang out in Mexican discos and read books and start the script for The Last Boy Scout. And it was during that time that Monster Squad sold, also somewhere around that same time. And success, well, man, as they say, mo money, mo problems, right? It didn't change.
That's exactly what I say.
Yeah, that's what all the kids say. I guess what I'm trying to get to with Shane Black that I think is cool contextually is just that he didn't change much, but his whole world started turning upside down around this time. Like, he could pay his own bills, and that was all he was concerned about. But everything else was different. He's this introverted guy. He likes to dance every once in a while. And now all of a sudden he talks about having Beverly Hills real estate agents somehow have his number and they're calling him, trying to get him to buy a new place. He meets girls, but it's sometimes harsh because he's like really socially awkward. He says he dated one girl at one time and woke him up at 2:00 in the morning because he was like into her. She was some kind of artisty girl. She called him at 2:00 in the morning to berate him. She hated that he was in a position making so much money and writing the stuff that he does. He said she told him, quote, I should be ashamed of myself because there are real writers out there struggling and I write this trash. And also imagine that you've been writing shit your whole life, and now the whole world is critiquing it. You had your own little world, and everybody's now picking it apart. So he's starting to get like really bummed out by this whole thing. He's being attacked for everything from the violence in his script to his shit being too male oriented. Yes, time is a flat circle. And you think Shane Black knows how to respond eloquently and politically correct to any of that stuff? No, he does not.
Probably not.
Yeah. He said, I found a quote from where he talks about where somebody asked him that. He said, if a feminist thinks I'm evil because I dip heavily into male icons, then I'm just going to have trouble getting along with that person. I write about male heroes because I write adventure fiction. Sue me.
So I could get by with him just writing, male adventure heroes if it didn't sound like, and this happens a lot, especially around this time period, where these kind of movies always sound like these old white guy writers are airing their grievances with the modern world through their characters. And,
sure, but the thing is, like, Shane Black is like 28 years old when he's writing this
right,
movie.
which is wild to me, because like Bruce Willis, he sounds like almost like a Dirty Harry light.
Yeah.
Oh, very.
And like you want to make me mad? Play some rap music. Like what is that?
Right. It's very old man. So what Gary was
didn't he do almost the exact same joke at the beginning of Die Hard?
Yeah,
so.
with the Run DMC song. Yeah, so
Christmas music.
This goes back to what
Something with
Gary was
harmonica.
saying. This goes back to what Gary was saying about Shane. Going back to Shane Black's like infamous Hollywood parties. This is a line. This is a moment from the actual script of The Last Boy Scout, which highlights just how fucking good of a writer Shane Black is, for one thing, but it also kind of gives you a little bit of idea of where he's at. This is a screenplay. So exterior, posh Beverly Hills home, twilight. This is his description of the set of the scene in his script. This is the kind of house that I'll buy if this movie is a huge hit. Chrome, glass, carved wood, plus an outdoor solarium, a glass structure like a greenhouse, only there's a big swimming pool inside. This is a really great place to have sex. That's his description. That's his description, of course, of the house that we see in the movie in Lethal Weapon.
Read the Last Boy Scout one, because it's great.
And that house in Lethal Weapon, I mean, he did... First of all, the house in Lethal Weapon, that was actually Richard Donner's house that they shot that at. But that is the house that Shane Black bought with that money. Like he bought a mansion in Beverly Hills that was like a glass mansion, like glass walls. Like it was insane. And he had all these like, the dude's 28 years old. He's having these lavish parties with all this Hollywood elite. Like this guy comes from nowhere. He was working as an usher at a movie theater a couple years ago, and he sells a script for $250,000. He comes in, he buys this badass house, and all of a sudden he's the new it guy in Hollywood. Right.
Well, and you read this LA Times article, it describes like going up to it. He didn't even know what he was supposed to do. They said like in the LA Times article, they go to the Pato guys. And they're going around. They said like it's like pizza boxes everywhere. There's like 4 cars parked in the yard. Like it's just a bungalow. Like in the dining room, there is the one thing. It's called the Shane Shrine, and it's him on People magazine, like framed in the dining room. But then like right next to it is a thing called like the Pato Guys menu, and it's like a list of things you can get for what cost. So it was like praise 50 cents, sarcasm a penny, and this is like where he's at. And then like around this time, you can find stories with people close to him. There's like his brother Terry tells his story about how even after Lethal Weapon sold and then Monster Squad, they'd be out at a bar, like hanging out. They were like best friends, and Shane would get his tab and it's $10. And he'd look at his wallet and be like, hey man, I'm short. Can you help me out? And like Terry's like, you need to get a job. Like writing is not doing it for you. Like what is going on? But he says he doesn't know how to deal with wealth. He didn't know what to do with any money. He said basically he'd see a bundle of books he wanted. It's $50. He'd be like, that's too much. But he's got this money and expectations, and they all become a burden for him. His buddy Jimmy Burgess tells his story about how one day like Shane Black's just like bummed out, and he's like in the car and he's just like, dude, just drive me to Vegas. Just drive me to Vegas. He just wanted to take it all and put it on red. That's what he wanted to do. And he said he wasn't sure like how serious he would have been getting there, but he was like, he talked him down from it. like a quote from Shane around this time. He said, "From keeping busy by the time I started writing Lethal Weapon until basically the movie had come out, I hadn't really faced the fact that I had been making all of this money and surviving all of this pressure. And finally, I reached a point where it all caught up to me. I guess I didn't really deal with success very well for a while. I did not feel like I deserved it."
Yeah. He had some major issues where he did not feel like he had kind of an imposter syndrome, essentially, where he felt like he did not deserve that kind of success. So after, he got all this success, Lethal Weapon was a big hit, like we talked about last week. But then he had a recent breakup with a girlfriend. And then he'd had this frustration of his experience on Lethal Weapon 2. And that left him not only burned out and frustrated with the Hollywood machine, but lacking in confidence. Like he did not feel like he was good enough. Like he felt like he had just gotten kind of lucky with Lethal Weapon. So he took a 2-year sabbatical from writing. And according to Black, he said that he had not been doing much except, he said, I'd not been doing much except mourning my life and smoking cigarettes and reading paperbacks. So I sat down and transformed some of that bitterness into a character, the central focus of a private eye story, which became The Last Boy Scout. So he writes The Last Boy Scout, and then this script.
So yeah, imagine the opportunity comes up for Lethal Weapon 2, and he writes this complete bummer, and he kills Riggs. I think a woman gets raped and tortured and murdered or something in the story I read, or something like that. Right. Some of his friends are freaking out. They're like, this is symbolic suicide. Like he's killing Riggs. It's like killing this part of himself or something. But more importantly is Warner Brothers comes along, sees the script, and they're like, oh, hell no. No, this makes money, and that's not what we're going to do. They're looking for fun and comedic, that family-friendly atmosphere we talk about. And Shane's over here being big sad, and he's bringing down the mood for everybody. So after like 6 months, he drops off. I found a quote from him in an article during that time when he was hired to do the script. He said, quote, "I hated it. Hated it. I was burned out at this point and sweating ideas. It was not a good time. After 6 months, I jumped ship, scared rabbit, didn't want to make changes, didn't think I could. Jeff Boehm came in and did a good job. I regret that if I'd stayed on the project, I would have made a lot of money. I got paid $250,000 for the first and split that with co-writer Warren Murphy. I would have made $200,000 as a passive payment for the rights of the characters if I just sat on my hands. But because I spent 6 months agonizing and writing the goddamn thing, I made $125,000.
Right. So his
wild.
His salary was $250,000, which he split with Warren Murphy. So he got $125,000. Jeff Boehm, who had come in as to do some rewrites on the original Lethal Weapon to add some levity and stuff to it. We talked about that last week. Ended up getting screenwriting credits on it, whereas Shane Black just got a story credit. But he moves on. He finishes The Last Boy Scout script, and that script resulted in a bidding war in Hollywood, one that was eventually won by Lethal Weapon producer Joel Silver, who paid a record-breaking $1.75 million for rights to the screenplay.
Wow.
Now,
And it could have.
I say that Silver won that bidding war, but there was another bidder, and I could not anywhere find who it was, but
Karolko and TriStar.
That was the other bidder. They offered $2.5 million, and Shane Black actually turned that down so that he could work with Joel Silver again. And here's what he said about that decision. He said, "There's an expression that the Satan you know is better than the Satan you don't know. I wanted to work with Joel Silver because I think he gets my ideas, and I thought I could deal with the people at Warner Brothers. Not that I would always agree with them, but I could deal with them. It seemed like that would mean the least stress for me. Whether it's worth what I gave up, I don't know. But what the fuck? It's all monopoly money." So
that's his attitude. It's like big monopoly money. And he's like, during this time, so he's in this period, this 2 years that Justin's talking about. I mean, he loses his entire desire to write. One of the close members of his family is dying. He never will talk about too much who. He ends a long-term relationship, and he's wallowing, and he spends this 2 years, and he says he's starting, I think his quote was like, starting to really fritz. I was afraid to do the next project, afraid of failing, afraid of being the fluke. But the trick is with him, for some reason, this MFer, We talked about this last time.
What's
with
your
Lethal
language,
Weapon.
Gary?
Yeah, sorry. So when Black hit the scene with Shadow Company at first, it was the wrong time, right? But by the time he came back with Lethal Weapon, all of a sudden Hollywood had started this insanity for original ideas. They were super into, like in the 80s, these spec scripts could make you bank. And they were just looking for anything new and exciting. And I hate it for Black and his depression, but he timed it again because by the time he decided to leave, come back, focus up again, and start working on The Last Boy Scout, he hit Hollywood in 1989, which is the right place, right time for screenwriters because everything started to boom. What Justin's talking about there is like part of the deal when he left Fox to drop out of that sci-fi epic to do Lethal Weapon was they got first crack at any screenplay he did. So they had to offer it to them. Fox came back with $875,000. I think that was the deal. And to hear Shane Black tell it, he says, David Greenblatt comes up to him and is like, I think we can do better than that. And Shane Black says, whatever, go for it. And so he just sits in his house and reads. And they go to work. On a Monday morning, Geffen offers $1.25 million. Carolco and TriStar match it and then go for 1.5, then 1.6. On Tuesday, Geffen and Warner Brothers team up and offer 1.75. Carolco and TriStar come back with $2 million, then 2.5 million. The whole time, everybody that talks about it says Shane Black didn't even answer his phone. Like he would not take a call.
Well, what you're saying here is that so the movie goes, he hands it into his agent on Monday morning. And by Tuesday night, he had sold that script for $1.75 million.
Well, it could have been 2.5, but he cares so little about the amount that he just went with Joel Silver.
Because it's comfortable.
Just like you said, for the least amount of stress.
Well, he answered his phone at some point because Joe Silver had seen this script because it was originally called Die Hard.
Yeah,
and when the adaptation of Nothing Lasts Forever came out, Silver wanted to call that movie Die Hard and called Shane Black up and said, hey, is it okay if we change this title here?
We talked about that a little bit last week. So what happened was he had an early version of the script that Joel Silver
because it's more focused on the wife, I think, in that script, right?
Oh yeah. So what happens? So Black's original screenplay, much like Lethal Weapon's original screenplay, honestly, was quite different from the finished product. The plot beats are the same in The Last Boy Scout, but most of the film's big action sequences aren't there, and the ending is entirely different. It's a much darker story, and honestly, like the bones of The Last Boy Scout are pretty fucking dark. But like so in the original screenplay, which is readily available online, and I read it yesterday, and it's very easy to find.
Is it better?
Oh fuck, it's fucking great, man. I'll post a link to it in this episode, like in the episode description, because it's like I said, it's pretty easily available on the internet.
Right.
But the entire third act is very, very different. So the final act of the original script is set in these fog-bound boats around Long Beach, and so you've got this great atmosphere. You know, you're out on the water, you've got fog, but then there's this big reveal that the story's true villain is Senator Baynard's brain-damaged son. So there's none of this shit where you've got Jimmy Dix riding a horse across a football stadium. There's nobody falling into the blades of a helicopter. There's nobody dancing a little jig on a bunch of lights at the end of the movie. None of that's in the original script.
Well, and to go to that brain damaged son you're talking about, it's
played by Leonardo DiCaprio.
Probably. Yes. He's brain damaged because Hollaback is the senator's bodyguard, and the senator's son, drunk driver, is a drunk driver and kills a mother and kid, and they want to cover it up, and Hollaback refuses to go around. He doesn't want to go along with it, and actually beats the fuck out of the son, damaging his brain.
Yeah.
And the son comes back as the villain
the one that makes some brain damage to begin with?
Right. Yeah. And so a lot of Black's original intent was taken out of the final film. A lot of it was for purely practical reasons. Like they're like shooting out on the water and trying to get a bunch of fog, and they're like, this is just too difficult to do. So the boats were taken out and they were replaced with your kind of more standard action movie car chases. Other stuff that they took out, though, included a side plot where the henchman Milo, Taylor Negron's character, is
Oh, you mean
involved-
Scary Fred Armisen?
Yeah,
Scary Fred. That's who he is.
Oddly enough, he's also a comedian. Just for the record,
he is. He's
a comic.
But so one of the side plots in the original,
amazing things.
He's great. He plays a lot of villains because he's got that villainous look. But in the original script, Milo is involved in the production of snuff movies, which also actually threatens Hallenbeck's wife, Sarah. So in the original screenplay, Sarah's got a much bigger role, and she gets kidnapped by Milo in one scene. And then there's a scene later where Hallenbeck, Joe, he storms the film studio where they're filming snuff movies, right? There's a scene earlier in the film where they establish that Milo's involved in the production of snuff films. And then later on, after they kidnap Sarah, Joe, he goes looking for her and he storms the studio. He bursts in, and Sarah is tied to a bed naked, completely naked. There's a director there. There's a cameraman there, and there's an actor in air quotes. The actor is holding a fucking chainsaw over his naked wife. So Hallenbeck storms in. He shoots the director. He shoots the cameraman, and then he's got this great one-liner. He says, "Cut," and then he throws a knife into the neck of the guy with the fucking chainsaw. It's a great scene. It's a great fucking scene in the screenplay that never made it into the movie because they completely cut that whole subplot out. But it's really, really great. And
Milo is like Mr. Joshua on steroids.
Well, I was gonna ask who's scarier, Milo or Mr. Joshua?
Yeah. Milo in the script is absolutely terrifying. And the thing is, like, Sarah actually gets a really great moment later on in the finale, because the finale of this original screenplay takes place on like a freeway, which in a couple of weeks, in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and you're going to see a lot of shit from the Last Boy Scout screenplay that didn't make it into the final film that made it into the Kiss Kiss Bang Bang final film, which is really interesting. Cool. But Sarah gets this great moment where she's actually the one who comes back and shoots Milo and kills him.
Nice.
In the original
There's a
script.
scene in the script that was eerie to me, and I can't remember if it was like right at that end part or before, but she like tries to cut at Milo, and he holds his arm up and it like slices his arm, and he just like stares at her and is like, "You've damaged my flesh."
Yes. Oh, that's like his character
psychopath.
in the original script. I mean, he's great in the movie. I think he's a great character, but in the screenplay, he could have been one of the all-time great like movie monsters. Like he is really scary in it.
Nice.
So how much is Darian in the screenplay?
She's in it a lot.
Okay.
I mean, she's her character has, I think, about the same amount of exposure as in the original one. It's really Sarah who really gets the short shafted in the final film.
And we can talk about that in a minute, why that actually is. I think a big part of that is going to come with Bruce Willis. But,
yes, absolutely.
But yeah, I think Black talks about this. Like he said, literally 2 days after selling the script, he was in a room with 14 studio executives who were telling him everything he had to change.
Yeah. We're gonna pay almost $2 million for your script and then tell you how to write it.
He says he'll never understand why studios will pay all of this money just to rip up everything he wrote down.
Well, I mean, part of that is because everyone wants to say that they did this,
Right.
But this makes so much more sense to me because the entire time I'm watching this movie, I'm thinking, this is a guy who's written two things I already like at this point. He's did Lethal Weapon and Monster Squad. And then, he did the unscripted stuff for Predator. And then he's gone on to write things that I absolutely love. Why is this movie so weak? So hearing this makes so much more sense because the entire time, like I see flecks of like really good scenes. There's some really good scenes.
And there's even more to come.
Miles, we're gonna have to get into a discussion about this later because I can tell you what, there's a lot more shit that's going on in this movie and will go on in this movie, but I still watched this banger like 3 times this week. I fucking love this movie.
So here's the thing. I grew up loving this movie. Like I own this movie on VHS. I've owned it on DVD, and I don't know if it's on Blu-ray or not.
We looked for it last week, I think. And it's like, some expensive, like either not Region 1 or something.
Right.
Or like on like one of those split Blu-rays. It's like that and another movie, like not a real Blu-ray release.
I originally watched this movie not because I knew anything about it, because at the time I wasn't paying that much attention to what was going on in Hollywood, but I went to the local Blockbuster because they used to have those giant books and you could look up certain actors and stuff.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
I put in Daniel Harris's name as one would do. And The Last Boy Scout.
The pages were stuck together and we were like, Gary.
It's weird. It's weird how Miles and I can connect on certain things, because I did the same thing, like stumbling on this movie, and it was like one of those first times I really connected on. I can look back on and connected on somebody who wasn't a superstar actor like a Bruce Willis.
Right.
That I realized, like, I know her. Where is she? She's in Halloween. Oh my God, that's the same girl. And I started to piece it together. It's like,
I love that you say that. Like, that's one of the few things that we connect on, as we're both big wrestling fans.
I said that we have things. This is, maybe I said few. I didn't mean few. We connect on everything.
So The Last Boy Scout had a famously difficult shoot, which was aided, I think, by the number of massive egos on set on this film.
Air quotes around the word aided, right?
Right. Yeah. So the first of those egos was, of course, Joel Silver himself, who brought on his Die Hard co-star, Bruce Willis, which was the second giant ego that you had on set. And then Tony Scott, who was at the height of his success, was brought on as a director. So Scott had kind of become an A-list action director after the success of Top Gun in 1986. He followed that up with the highly anticipated sequel Beverly Hills Cop 2 in 1987, and then Days of Thunder in 1990. And then the three of them, you got all these big egos on set, and Tony Scott has admitted in interviews he felt like he was even the low man on the totem pole, is the way he described it on set. Like, but the three of them butted heads constantly on set. There was a lot of pressure really on everyone involved, including Shane Black, who was constantly asked to rewrite the script and make it bigger. The studio kind of wanted to fit it into this mold of what action movies were at the time. And the studio also expected this to be kind of Bruce Willis's follow-up to Die Hard. But Bruce Willis was kind of reluctant, saying, he said, this whole movie is about me saving my wife, and I just did that in Die Hard. So that's why that whole subplot that we mentioned about his wife, about Sarah in this movie, was sort of completely taken out of the movie. Because
around this time he'd been doing Die Hard 2, I think. And like they'd worked
Die
it
Hard
out.
2, yeah, it was around 1990, I think.
And a lot of this, just to be clear, like Tony Scott, I mean, around the time he was offered The Last Boy Scout, he was already working on another movie. It was a war movie set in Afghanistan, but funding kind of fell through on it. And so he took up Joel Silver's offer because he liked and loved the original script he was shown from Shane Black. Like, he was super into that script and wanted to do it. And as we mentioned, that is going to go all over the place.
Yeah.
And Joel Silver is a big part. I mean, like Joel Silver, we talked a little bit about him last week. But by this time, from like where Lethal Weapon was when Shane Black first hooked up with him till now, he's become, along with like Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Silver, he's become the action producer of the 80s.
Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson, by the way, who produced Top Gun and Days of Thunder. Like they were big in the Tony Scott business at that point.
Isn't Joel Silver the one who kind of collapsed the Tim Burton, Kevin Smith Superman movie?
I don't know.
That would be super funny if it's true, because
I remember Kevin Smith saying that Joel Silver really wanted a spider in the movie.
Is that the one?
That sounds fucking right. That sounds right.
And he said that when they canned Superman, or what they call it, Superman Lives.
Yeah.
Superman Lives, and then Wild Wild West, he got his mechanical spider.
Are you sure it was Joel Silver?
We're not sure.
We're not 100% sure. We
sure
check on that.
To our listeners,
need to be
please fact check us and tweet at
there's
Mr.
a documentary
Todd
out there about it.
Joel Silver is probably worth a whole story someday from us.
Oh, God, yes.
He's I mentioned a little bit in the Lethal Weapon episode, comparing him to like Richard Donner, that he was like more serious. But by this time, although Shane Black loves this guy apparently, or trusts him, his reputation for no nonsense on the set, excess, being loud as hell, and making sure he gets his way on every set he's on. It's the stuff of legend.
We're going to call him a very hands-on producer.
Yeah.
Joel
This is the guy
Silver.
who dropped out of, but to his credit, just briefly, he dropped out of New York University Film School so he could just do it on his own. He was sick of just dealing with that shit. So he became an assistant and worked his way up through Universal and eventually got in trouble with them because he was spending so much money on his own furniture and paying for his own birthday parties with their money. But somehow he ended up working at Fox, and he got in trouble at Fox because he had his driver smash through the gates to the studio because he didn't like waiting. and then just anyway, another time though. Studios were willing to tolerate
correct.
Joel Silver because he made Brewster's Millions, Commando, Predator, Die Hard, Lethal Weapon.
Brewster's Millions.
But he just loved to spend too much money. So his thing with Bruce Willis was, it's like he wanted Bruce Willis back for Die Hard 2, and Bruce Willis didn't want to do it. Bruce Willis was really obsessed with getting his movie done that he thought would be the next big thing for him, which is about his singing cat burglar. And that was his Hudson Hawk movie.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like during the production of this movie, of The Last Boy Scout, Hudson Hawk is released in theaters, and it does fucking terrible. It's a major box office bomb. So that adds even more pressure to Joel Silver and to Bruce Willis because they both needed another big hit because their last movie together did horribly.
You're only as good as your
So
last
he
movie.
promised to get funding for Hudson Hawk if Willis would come back for Die Hard 2. And then Willis did. Somehow along the way, they convinced him to take this part, which, by the way, all that stuff we talked about earlier, obviously Shane Black's Down Our Time is contributing to this character that Bruce Willis is going to play. By the time all of this lands, Hudson Hawk hits and everybody's freaking the fuck out now. So all of the egos are also in panic mode.
And Willis was already becoming the sort of like kind of egotistical prick that he's kind of become known to be over recent years, you know,
and most famously by Kevin Smith.
Yeah. So he and Joel Silver were sort of hell to work with. And they essentially hijacked the set of this movie, and they threatened to fire Scott during the production. And they would sometimes during the shooting of The Last Boy Scout, they would change entire scenes to their liking. And because they were, as Tony Scott put it, higher on the totem pole, they kind of got their way.
Marion Doherty, who we mentioned last week briefly with the casting, who's responsible for like Danny Glover being Murtaugh, like who had pitched it to Donner and, you know, that whole story. She's a lady who's been she would go on to be like the vice president of talent at Warner Brothers from like 1979 to 2000. She was big in casting, and she worked with like all kinds of directors through this time. She has a book out called My Casting Couch Was Too Short. That's the name of her book. And she talks about some
great title.
Yeah. She describes The Last Boy Scout as like some weird stuff. Like she talks about in one part, they'd cast Marge Helgenberger as Hallebeck's wife. Sarah said she had tested well, been offered the role and accepted, but despite not having casting approval, Bruce Willis insisted on them hiring Chelsea Fields. He attended a meeting with Silver, Scott, and Doherty and managed to get Hellenberger dismissed, and Chelsea Field awarded the part instead. The casting director said, this part of reading, she said, in all her years before and since, she's never seen such a thing ever happen, that an actor just got someone recast because they could. There was no other words. She found it charmless and unnecessary, is how she described it.
Yeah,
she said she enjoyed working
Bruce
with
Willis at this time was, for all intents and purposes, a super big asshole.
She said she enjoyed working with Scott, however, but he insisted that they film every single audition on tiny VHS C tapes. And by the time the picture was cast, they had a pile 5 feet high. And Scott never did anything with those tapes. She wrote, in this regard, he was worse than Stanley Kubrick.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Another fun one I thought with him was, she said, in casting Billy Cole who was played by Billy Blanks in the movie.
Billy Blanks.
Yeah, good old Tybo.
Well, so Billy Blanks at this time was doing a lot of martial arts action films.
Yeah, he wasn't the Tybo guy quite yet.
Well, all I was going to say about it, she said she brought him in for an audition. Scott said, no, he's not right. He doesn't have the right look, and got rid of him. She said they went on to audition almost every single football player on the West Coast before she finally just brought Billy Blanks back, and he auditioned for Tony Scott, and Scott loved him. And she couldn't convince him, you turned him down already.
If you want to see an awesome Billy Blanks acting role, look up King of the Kickboxers, or also Karate Tiger 4, also known as
Tiger 4.
Yes, also known as No Retreat, No Surrender 4. We did a whole series on these movies on The More You Nerd because we had a game developer who was a massive fan of this series.
Nice.
And so we've gone through all of them. But he plays the bad guy in King of the Kickboxers. And he's super cheesy, but like you can see why someone would choose him as far as a villainous character. And here in the opening throwaway bit of him being a football player who openly just guns people down. Like, what's your goal here?
Yeah,
like that opening is wild.
It's fucking crazy.
And it was so what absolutely blew my mind was that it's hardly ever referenced.
It's never referenced. I don't know why it's there.
It's a weird opening, and also they would have canceled with that kind of rain. I think they would have canceled that football game.
Okay, thank you, Justin. That is a Tony Scott thing. Because do you remember
it's 100%? It's 100% a Tony Scott highly just aesthetic thing.
Yes. Do you remember the movie that he did? The Fan?
I think it looks great, but in reality, that would not have ever happened.
So.
Says
the
you
first
who
thing
stopped
I saw was Tony Scott.
Tom Brady walking out with a gat.
If it ends with Tom Brady shooting himself, then yeah.
If you've seen Wesley Snipes' The Fan,
Life of Bitch,
that Tony Scott also directed, that movie ends with a monsoon.
The Fan?
Yeah, The Fan.
Yeah.
There's that monsoon at the end that would never happen in actual baseball. And even this shot, I'm like, I don't think any football game would go on like this.
No, but you know what? It looks fucking cool.
It looks awesome.
And that's the thing with Tony Scott's aesthetic style in general.
Does it look cool? Supersedes, is this at all realistic?
Exactly.
Right.
Does it look cool? And if it looks cool, it's making it on the screen.
Well, see, I think this is where Tony Scott like matches up well with Shane Black, like as far as like probably what he liked in the script. Most of his stuff has these like heavily flawed heroes that are in the movies. They're in circumstances where they can try to get some redemption out of it.
And I think you're right, Gary, because
ridiculous
he did
visuals.
True Romance, and that works.
Yeah.
He's not subtle, but I will say this: it's not subtle like Michael Bay. Like Michael Bay just like pulls back and just shows all of this bullshit. I love that Tony Scott has this ability to like everything that's going on in that football game. Somehow it's like background and it's still focused in on the characters involved. Like the whole time Billy Blanks is like focused in on, and like there's shit going crazy behind him, but whatever.
Well, I think I love these fake NFL teams, that the LA Stallions, and
well, they couldn't use real NFL teams based on the plot of this movie.
Yeah, I think even he was supposed to say, I'm going to Disneyland right before he shoots himself, but I don't think that went over well. Supposedly.
Probably, yeah, that makes sense. But it's funny you mentioned Michael Bay, because Michael Bay and Tony Scott both kind of got their start under Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson. Like they got there, and they had very similar styles, like very uber stylized, uber like visual styles that they do. But I think Tony Scott has a way of shooting them that's a little less excessive than Michael Bay.
Yeah,
right.
I feel like,
and I think that's not just in this movie, but over his entire career. I think Tony Scott has a way to do the kind of the same kind of stuff that Michael Bay's doing, but in a way that, I don't know, for me it works a little bit better in his movies because it's a little more focused on the characters.
There was an interview that I saw with him where he talked about specifically, now that you said that he said style is dictated by character, I think is his exact quote. Style
Which Michael Bay would never say.
Yeah, and
Right.
and so I think he does go for these pure cinematic, just crazy things happening, but he does focus in on how it's impacting the person in the scene, that sort of thing.
Right.
Well,
More
and
so.
I feel like out of all of Tony Scott's movies, this is might be his more Michael Bay like, because in terms of style dictating things, I mean, the car falling in the pool and splashing over the guy who is that Andy Richter? Because it looks like Andy Richter.
I don't think it's Andy Richter.
Okay.
It does kind of look like him though, but
the guy went on to do True Romance, Crimson Tide, The Fan, Enemy of the State, Man on Fire, which is a largely celebrated, like, kind of late Denzel Washington movie. I do agree with the assumption that he's kind of doing what Michael Bay does, but with a lot more heart behind it.
Well, not just that, Miles. Just if I could jump in real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that I also think different than Michael Bay is that there's as much going on, but it's very composed. It's deep. Like, you can always tell what's going on, as opposed to like Michael Bay, where sometimes you don't know what the fuck is even happening.
Right. But I agree with all of that, except in this movie.
See, I felt that
we'll get into in a minute why that is.
I know. I'm with you. I love this movie. I really do. I mean, I told Justin, oh, you guys doing Shane Black? I want to do The Last Boy Scout. Real bad.
So we'll get into in a minute why I think some of it is a little confusing. And
can we just say for a second, though, that Miles, what happened to our girl Danielle? Well, first of all, I did want to mention Marion Doherty cast Halle Berry.
First of all, she's the star of this movie, so how dare you, sir?
But yeah, Danielle Harris, I was looking at her, and by the way, Shane Black seems to love like smart ass little kids. That seems to be another trademark.
That's definitely a thing in Shane Black movies.
This is my high school number. What year did you graduate?
But she was in like, I was looking at this. She had started like One Life to Live, but then Halloween 4, Halloween 5, that was in 88, 89. She did Marked for Death, I think, which was Steven Seagal, and Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, City Slickers, all of, like, I think Don't Tell Mom and City Slickers were all the same year as
She's
Last
one of your
Boy Scout.
like premier child actors.
Yeah, like what happened? Like, I mean, not what happened. She's great. She's doing fine.
Well,
she's
no,
hot,
the question is, why
amazing.
wasn't she cast for other roles after she kind of turned 16?
Yeah. I don't know. Just weird.
After Urban Legend, outside of the horror community, you don't see her at all. Like she did there was a Jennifer Tilly movie, I think it's called Screwed. I can't remember what it's called, but she did this like dramatic comedy, and that was kind of the last thing she did.
Yeah, she's mostly been embraced by the horror community since, though, I think.
And she knows that.
And she appeared in the Rob Zombie movies.
We're going to have to talk more about these male egos butting heads, so I just wanted to give some little nudge to Halle Berry and Danielle Harris there.
All right. Well, speaking of male egos butting heads, speaking of casting on this movie, Bruce Willis's co-star on this movie was Damon Wayans, who had, before this movie, really mostly appeared in small roles in bigger movies, like in Beverly Hills Cop. He has a small role. He had already done, what's the fucking movie? Hollywood Shuffle. He'd already done Hollywood Shuffle at this point, where he had a small role, which is a great movie that I highly recommend if you haven't seen it. And was at this time becoming known as a writer and performer on the sketch comedy show In Living Color. And according to most sources from the set, Damon Wayans and Bruce Willis hated each other, which for most of the movie, their characters hate each other. So it kind of works out.
I think it works great. It's perfect. And I don't know why they hate each other. They were both like the previous year. They were in Look Who's Talking together. I mean, as voicing like babies and shit.
I don't think they were ever on set together.
Yeah.
No, I heard that too. And it's weird because
I'm so sorry. Look Who's Talking too.
You can honestly kind of see how much they don't like each other in the movie.
You just
like
think
a little bit.
That's good performance, though, right?
No, it's not. They really just do not like each other.
It's a hostile work environment.
Assistant director James Shuttledopoulos.
Good job.
That's it.
Yep,
I guarantee you. It looks like Scotch DePaul or something. Scotch DePaul. I like Shuttlecock Pole. That was a good one.
He was the.
But that's a different podcast altogether.
He was the first AD on this movie, and I apologize to Jim for
like, is he gonna go again?
But
it's JS to his friends, buddy.
This is his quote. This is a quote from him about his kind of reasoning for the high onset tension for this film, because it was the result of what he called an overabundance of alpha males on the project. He said Bruce was at the height of his stardom. So was Joel. So was Tony. And so was Shane. There were a lot of people who had a lot of opinions about what to do. And there were some heated early 90s testosterone charged personalities on the line. So that's kind of his whole reason.
There you go.
For what's going on. It's a dick measuring contest.
It really
between
is.
4 dudes on the set of this film.
He kind of talks about everybody thinking they're in charge, and it should be Tony Scott calling the shots, but it was actually Willis and Silver most of the time, like yelling things out to people, telling them what to do. They overrode decisions, made changes to shots and the script. And there's that, but I will say, I think that quote you got was from a Guardian interview.
It was.
Yeah, and in that same interview, he talks about like that idea that like Scott was forced to shoot certain scenes, and if he didn't, he would lose his fee or be fired or whatever. And Jim, he shoots that idea down in that interview, says that nobody at that time could make Scott shoot something he didn't want to.
Yeah, he says that there's a lot of rumors about that Scott was forced to shoot stuff that he didn't want to shoot, but he's like, Tony Scott's not that guy. Tony Scott's not going to shoot something that he doesn't want to shoot.
I found a great thing, though, from a podcast called Retro Junkies with Taylor Negron being interviewed. And he talks about Joel Silver, just how fug nuts he was. Just little details like him being in a costume fitting and Negron's wearing Dolce & Gabbana suit, and Silver walks in and just stares at it for like 2 seconds. It was like, the piping on those buttons don't match. Change it all. And so like just weird stuff. Wow, he brought in OJ Simpson to offer creative input on the football scenes. He was like, tell us if we're doing this right.
Not on the murder.
Yeah. Like he describes, he was like Tony Scott was doing
by
stuff.
Tony Scott's work. He thought, I'm going to handle this wife problem.
Oh God. He said that Scott was doing his best with what little space he had to maneuver, basically, is how he described it.
So the shoot was like a shit show for by all intents and purposes.
Well, 2/3 of the way through the shoot, like there was a part where they what was it I was thinking of there? Oh, the crowd got called in, like a bunch of people got called in for the second day of shooting, and then it was like bad weather, and then they told everybody to just go home, and like people had been waiting for like hours or something, and almost caused a riot outside of the stadium. It was just all kinds of bullshit. Yeah, I don't know. I read stuff like Joel Silver, though, even in like a interview with the New Yorker in '94, said that this was one of the 3 worst experiences of his entire life.
Yeah, he was not happy with this entire experience. And then once the incredibly difficult shoot was over, that's when the real problems began.
Now, wait, I will say this, by the way, if I can. One interesting story that I did find, courtesy of Tony Scott, and it was from Empire magazine. I'm trying to give credit where I can here.
The Empire interview is outstanding, by the way.
Yeah, but he talks about this film geek who keeps pestering him with stupid questions during the shoot. Or not stupid, I don't think he says stupid, but just keeps pestering him with questions during the shoot, including how to shoot smoke convincingly. That geek turned out to be Quentin Tarantino.
That fucking nerd.
Incoming transmission.
Hey folks, it's your old friend Mr. Todd A. Davis from the Cinema Shock podcast, here to ask, are you tired of seeing a random episode of Star Trek and thinking, I wonder where this falls into the overall prime timeline? I know I am. That's why I'm bringing you a new podcast covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order. It's called Computer Resume Podcast. Each week, join me and a rotating panel of my family and friends as we boldly talk Trek like no one has before. If there's a joke to be made, we'll make it. And if there's a poignant discussion to be had, well, we'll try our best. We'll also have interviews, contests, take listener questions, and other things currently deemed classified by Section 31. Those shifty motherfuckers. So join us every week starting in January of 2021 for the Computer Resume podcast, free wherever you get your podcasts. And be the first to hit us up online now at Computer Resume on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Or email us directly at computerresumepodcast@gmail.com. The Computer Resume podcast, part of the Slice of Fried Gold Network. Hashtag LLAP. We'll see you soon.
So by most accounts, the original cut of the film was, this is a quote, borderline unwatchable. And so the production brought in several different editors to try to piece it all together. So you see, Tony Scott has a reputation for shooting excessive coverage using multiple cameras on every scene, which results in a lot of footage. So on his previous film to this, which was Days of Thunder, he had shot 1.6 million feet of film.
Jesus.
Of which about 12,000 feet was ultimately used in the final product. So dude shoots a lot of film.
I like to think that every scene he has to sweep the camera across something.
He likes that move.
Yeah.
So Mark Helfrich was one of seven editors who worked on this film.
Yeah.
And he described having to sort through mountains of raw material to edit the first cut of the film, saying there was more footage shot for The Last Boy Scout than on any film that I've ever worked on.
I will say this for Joel Silver around this time too. One of the cool things I saw with him, I mean, whatever. Hollywood's complicated, but he did describe this time period as he said, I didn't finish Lethal Weapon with a movie, but I came out of the editing suite with one.
Yeah, and that was his plan with this one. He's like, I was not happy with the movie that we finished shooting at the end of The Last Boy Scout, but God damn it, I was coming out of the editing suite with a film.
Yeah. So he seems to rely on his editors. So
one of the other editors on the film was a guy by the name of Mark Goldblatt. So Goldblatt is a legend in the film editing community and is known especially as an expert in editing action movies. I mean, if you look at Mark Goldblatt's filmography, it includes Terminator 1, Terminator 2, True Lies, Armageddon, The Rock, Bad Boys 2, Starship Troopers, Rambo, First Blood Part 2, Commando. Like the guy is
damn.
Like it's a hell of a filmography.
Yeah.
This guy was so traumatized by the post-production experience on The Last Boy Scout that he refuses to talk about it in interviews.
I found him in a podcast called Podcast Slightly, and he's quick. He doesn't want to talk about it.
And that's the only quote I found about him about this was in that one podcast.
Yeah, just basically saying that by the time he was called in, they'd already started to preview the picture, and test audiences didn't like what they saw. They found Willis's character to be completely unlikable.
Which makes sense, honestly.
Yeah.
I think he went on to say that, like, Tony Scott, who he liked a great deal, and Silver were both headstrong characters, but how many captains can a ship have?
Yeah, exactly. So, and during all of these edits, according to these multiple editors, previous editors' work was just kind of undone. Like they would edit and they would give their cut, and then that work was kind of thrown away. So the edits would be put back into the daily reels. And you could even see like the little splice, the little cigarette burns and there, things like that. You could see their splices in the dailies. When another editor would come along, they would be able to see the previous editor's work. And then Warner Brothers began testing the movie before it was done. And they were worried about the kind of less than enthusiastic reactions from test audiences, as well as the film's expanding budget. And like Gary mentioned, the pretty unlikable character played by Bruce Willis, which is at the film's kind of center.
Yeah.
Eventually, things kind of took a turn for the positive when they brought in Stuart Baird, who is an editor. He had helped to shepherd Trouble Productions to completion in the past, most notably with Tango and Cash, and then even a little bit after this movie with Demolition Man. Baird had previously worked with Richard Donner on going all the way back to The Omen, and of course on Lethal Weapon, which is where Joel Silver knew him from. So Joel Silver naturally wanted to bring him on board for this movie, which was having some trouble in the edit.
Yeah, like Stuart Baird is the fixer. Like he comes in and straightens these things out. Like with the Lethal Weapon, like you said, I think he'd even done Die Hard 2, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, his big one that he really got credit for was Tango and Cash, which will be a whole other episode someday. That he completely fixed in the editing suite. When everybody thought that film was going nowhere for similar reasons, from my understanding. But he came in so late that his name's not even featured on any of the stuff.
Right. Yeah. No. Well, it's not even on. I think it might be in the movie, but it's not in the movie. It's not on the posters because he came in so late that his name wasn't put on the posters at all.
Yeah.
So, and despite the difficulties in the shoot, I think, and in the edit, for that matter, in my opinion, I think Tony Scott's style is still very much present in the final product. Like we talked about that opening scene.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially the opening scene.
Yeah, but you even throughout the movie, you get that kind of golden haze and those smoky blue nights that he had perfected, that look that he had perfected while working for Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson. And I also think there's kind of a John Woo influence here. I mean, you see Bruce Willis's character running with two guns throughout the movie. And that's a very John Woo kind of thing, you know?
No, well, and I think another thing too is the perfection of. I still stand by that Tony Scott and a Shane Black script are like a match made in heaven, because the kind of stuff that Tony Scott's attracted to is the kind of stuff that Shane Black likes too. And Shane Black typically likes. We didn't get to talk about like much of the cinematography in the last one in Lethal Weapon, but I mean, one of the things Shane Black talked about loving in Lethal Weapon, and you can tell he loves it again here, is there is probably even more here, night stuff, but like he loves showing LA for what it is, like not as this fairy tale land, but like this bleached out daylight, like just plain desert land kind of thing. And it's just like not as glamorous as some things would have you believe. And I feel like that Scott's doing a very good job of also showing that here.
Black, I think, also likes to show LA for the labyrinth that it is, where you think you're going one way and you're going another. I mean, you see that in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. You see that in The Nice Guys. And you see that coming up in other LA films, like the one that I know you and I saw, Gary, Under the Silver Lake.
Oh, yeah.
Like that kind of twisty, turny, like, I don't want to say adventure, but that definitely that journey that you go on in LA. You don't always end up where you think you're going to. And I love these kind of movies. I mean, I recently did a podcast with a buddy of mine, Travis, who does What You Haven't Seen, because I had never seen The Big Lebowski. It was one of the holes in my cinematic experience, it's a great film, but it's the same kind of journey. Like that movie is a wild journey of LA. And this is the same way.
I feel like Mulholland Drive comes to mind when you talk about that.
Absolutely.
You know, is that part of LA that's very specific to people who live in LA? If that makes sense, you know?
I was gonna save this for later when we talked a little bit more about Black, but this is a good time to mention it. I mean, I think you're 100% dead on with Shane Black on like what he's looking for, because he doesn't. I found an interview with him where like somebody specifically asked him about him making action films, and he seems to get annoyed if you call them action movies.
I don't think he makes action films.
Yeah, I don't think he writes action films.
He says here, like in this quote I got from this interview, he says, "Commando, where a man fires a gun for the full final 30 minutes, that's an action picture. What the character is thinking about as he is firing is more of interest to me. Is the impetus for all action." He said this is later. I think this is for the LA Times interview. He says the film industry right now only has two categories for movies. There's serious films and money makers, and it's either about apartheid or starving people, or maybe Ninja Turtles. But he says,
I mean, you gotta have Ninja Turtles.
But he talks about stuff like The Exorcist or 48 Hours are more reflective of reality. I think he said, I choke on the pretentiousness of calling myself a serious writer. I would rather be thought of as a storyteller than an author. Authors write about Russian winters. Storytellers write about guys who have adventures. Hopefully, I'll do my revelatory sort of work, stuff about love, once I found out what it means, stuff about the nature of things. Until then, I'm proud to be just writing mysteries.
Well, last week, Gary, when we were talking about Lethal Weapon and talking a little bit about Shane Black's early life, we talked about how he grew up loving these hard-boiled detective stories, like these paperback novels.
Right. And you can tell with the way he writes.
Right, but not with Lethal Weapon necessarily. Lethal Weapon is written more as an action movie. This is his first, like, real detective story.
I will say with Lethal Weapon, there is a murder mystery sort of at the heart of it with like...
Right, but not as much as like with this movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Having recently watched The Nice Guys, it feels like The Nice Guys is his therapy for The Last Boy Scout.
I feel that way about Kiss Kiss Bang Bang.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. I'm just with the daughter angle and everything. I feel like The Nice Guys kind of fills that out a little bit more nicely. But I agree completely. Like I feel like he's always perfecting that labyrinthine LA like mystery adventure.
And don't get, I mean, he takes stuff from other movies that like didn't work out. Like, I mean, there's the scene in this one, I know 100% where Hallebeck is sitting next to Dix and talking about his leather pants being $650. That's from Lethal Weapon. Yeah, that's just from his Lethal Weapon 2 script, where it's like Murtaugh talking to his wife who's wearing a new prom dress, and it's $650. And he's like, does it come with a TV in it or something? And she's like, no. And he's just like, I'm too old. Like, or something.
Well,
like
that
probably says I'm too old for this shit.
When Bruce Willis gets kicked in the nuts and the guy says Wolfman's got nards. I mean, so
it's all over the place. So even Tony Scott found this film lacking in later interviews. In 2012, he told Empire Magazine, that same article that Gary referenced, he says, I think the script was better than the final movie. And Shane Black agreed. Shane Black would later on, this was around the time The Nice Guys came out when he was being interviewed about this. He said, the film is a frustrating proposition, so much potential, then a lot of quote unquote big action, which evolved over time and bloated a much less grandiose blueprint. Because like we said, this was not written necessarily as an action movie. It's written as a hard-boiled detective story. And I think he's right. I think that, even on like Lethal Weapon, which we talked about last week, one thing we talked about and we praised Lethal Weapon for was that it put its characters ahead of the spectacle of the script. It's what's made that movie stand the test of time, I think. And what we were talking so much last week about what makes it so great is that the characters in it are so great. And you can certainly see something similar here. Like you can detect it underneath the surface of The Last Boy Scout. There are some really great character moments throughout this film, especially I think when Jimmy Dix is telling the story of how his wife and child died in a car accident. Like that is some
of the best scenes in the movie.
This Gremlins moment.
That is some morose Martin Riggs shit, right?
Oh
there.
Yeah.
If only it had been about his father coming down the chimney as Santa and breaking his neck.
You talking about Gremlins?
Yeah, that was his
Hey, it's the Christmas
moment.
season. As you watch The Last Boy Scout, I think that it loses those character moments instead replacing them with sort of typical 80s,
cliches,
90s action movie excess.
Yeah.
Especially as it moves towards its third act, which, as we said, is all but unrecognizable from what Shane Black originally wrote in his script.
Yeah. There are things that I do like. I love that. I mean, there are moments that almost borderline meta, even though I don't know if this movie is smart enough to be meta. But when Bruce Willis kills a man with fat jokes, that's a really good moment. It's genuinely funny, and it seems very smart. But then the movie plays it straight so much that you don't know if it's actually that smart.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that's that. I don't think that's an issue with Shane Black's script, though. I think that's just probably in the
no. I'm just talking about the movie itself.
Yeah. Because there are, if you read that original script, like that original script for The Last Boy Scout reads like a Tarantino movie. Honestly,
I can see that.
That's the best thing I can describe it to. Like one of my favorite moments from the script when I read it, that's very similar to a scene in the movie, is when Bruce Willis's character says to Milo, so he says, "Go fuck yourself" in the movie. And Milo's like, "What would you do if somebody said that to you? Would you gouge his eye out? What would you do if somebody said, go fuck yourself?" And in the script, he calls him a cocksucker. He doesn't say go fuck yourself. He calls him a cocksucker. And in the script, Milo says the same thing. He says, "What would you do if somebody said that to you? Would you gouge his eye out?" And Joe's response is, "Well, I'd probably go suck some cock and then get on with my life." Like that's a great fucking moment. That's a great fucking moment.
That's so funny you say that. I did not know that, and that was like one scene that stood out where I did not think it was as clever as Shane Black.
Right, and in the original script, like his response in the original script, I'm like, that is incredible, and I'm mad that they didn't put that in the movie.
Yeah,
well, the one thing that strikes me as Shane Black is the very end of the movie when they're walking off together and Bruce Willis is kind of giving Damon Wayans pointers to being a detective and talking about
telling about like one-liners.
Yes, like that to me was peak Shane Black. I mean
that's the Shane Black that wrote or that rewrote The Last Action Hero.
100%.
Yeah,
and I think that's my biggest problem with this movie. I do, like Gary, I loved this movie growing up. I think this movie's a lot of fun, but watching this with a more critical eye, you're like, why is everyone walking around like they're an action movie cliche?
Right.
Like they're spouting lines that I've heard 3 times elsewhere.
But at the same time, I do think that Shane Black's voice is so strong that it can't help but come through even in a compromised form, especially in the dialogue of the film.
Well, I mean, you're gonna laugh at me, but I feel like it comes through the most through Danielle Harris's Darian.
I would not disagree with that.
I think she's the strongest link in that movie.
Yeah. But I think, well, let's talk about that opening scene. We mentioned it a little bit before, but that scene in the football stadium, we don't really know what's going on. We never really know.
It's wild. It's a fucking wild scene.
It's an insane opening. And if you're writing a script and that's your opening scene that you write, you're like, yeah, I nailed this. I nailed this.
Where are we going from here?
Well, what's funny
you
is
don't really know what's going
on
on until much, much later in the movie.
I don't know how I lucked into this, but I mentioned this with Lethal Weapon too, and so I don't think it was like specifically a Shane Black thing. I mean, I'm just watching the movies that I had as a kid, but I mentioned in Lethal Weapon the woman taking a nosedive off the ledge at the beginning.
It's a great opening.
This is another one of those openings that I've always
dude writes a great opening.
Yeah, and I'm like, I guess just Shane Black's got it with the great openings. Like they work,
and it's the same way where you don't know you don't know what's going on. You don't know how that's going to connect to the larger story later on. You don't find out till much later exactly how that connects to everything else in the story.
I think even last week when we talked about it, I was like, I haven't even seen it. Is this the football thing and the guns or something?
I was like, I
just always remembered the football player just fucking taking out a gun and just blasting defenders away and then shooting himself.
So wild.
It's really wild. And then I think there's the masterful way that Shane Black introduces Joe, Bruce Willis's character. I love that opening scene with him. He's in his car, he's hung over, he's asleep in his car, not in his house. And you sort of already, you immediately know who this guy is based on the circumstances.
Yeah.
He's hungover. He's sleeping in his car. He's trigger happy because he immediately pulls out his gun and he's got a fucking dead squirrel on him. Like you know who this guy is immediately in that scene. And I think that's one of the great character introductions, I think, on par, I think, with the introduction of Martin Riggs' character in Lethal Weapon in the Christmas tree farm.
I agree with that. How was your last night? I think I fucked a squirrel to death and I don't even remember it. No, I'm glad you brought up Martin Riggs again, because I wanted to say, like, a lot of reviews for people that I looked up, I saw like multiple things where people like just constantly compared Riggs and Hollenbach or this movie with Lethal Weapon. And I get it. I mean, at a certain point, I mean, there are always going to be similarities, but
you got a sad white guy, you got a black guy.
Yeah. But I feel like they're totally different. Like even with
they're very different otherwise.
Riggs,
yes.
Like Riggs is a guy at the end of his rope and it's just a shit life. He's in a shit place. He wants to kill himself. He's suicidal. I don't take Hollenbach like that at all. Like, I don't think anything about his business is at a shit level. Bruce Willis is at a shit level, but just because He's not a guy who like gave up.
I think the character is at a shitty place in his life, but I don't think he's like suicidal like Martin Riggs.
Yeah, and I think it's
he's
because,
not ready to snuff it.
I think it's because of like the title and like David Wayne's signs on the card. He's like this guy who has a moral code throughout the movie. Like he maintains this moral code, and I know it's hard to
which
catch
you see in the flashbacks.
Yeah, how shitty he acts, but it's just because the world is so different than him. Like he's just constantly having to deal with bullshit. Like even when his friend is fucking his wife, he's still like not ever, like overly violent about it. He's he gets
over
a punch
it
in the head or the gut. Like it's like he's more pissed off at himself that he let it happen. And like he's just it's a different thing.
I think buried beneath all of this kind of cynical machismo of these characters is an extreme sadness. These characters, like Martin Riggs, like we talked about last week, like Martin Riggs is a broken man, a broken character, and not just Bruce Willis's character, but Damon Wayans' character as well. Jimmy Dix is a broken man. Like, yeah, he's mega rich because he was a star NFL quarterback, so he's set for life probably. But Jimmy Dix is addicted to painkillers. He's addicted to cocaine. He's lost his family. He's lost his career. And not long after the start of the movie, he's lost his new girlfriend, which is fucking Halle Berry. So he was like, that's rough, And then Joe is an Joe, we see him. He's an alcoholic. He's also lost a promising career, but that was due to his decision to kind of do the right thing, And then as a result, he has to pick up kind of these shady side jobs. Both of these guys are guys who they're kind of longing for their glory days because we see flashbacks where Joe he saves the president's life, and Jimmy Dix was a star quarterback with a promising career. These are guys who are both looking back at their glory days. And then there are these moments.
How do you come back from I saved the president's life?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of you kind of top things there. And then you get these moments where these guys connect. Like the aforementioned scene where Jimmy Dix opens up about his wife and child. Like that's heartbreaking,
It is, but it's weird because it juxtaposes with the scene that we recently saw beforehand of Halle Berry talking about the dead son, Alex. And so you're kind of confused. Is that her son? But no, because he tells this whole story about how both of them died.
Yeah.
And so it's a while. It's a little uncomfortable in terms of the audience perspective because
I can see that.
You're trying to like connect all these dots at the same time.
But I feel like for me,
well, I think that scene just goes to show the closeness because once you find out that he lost his wife and his son, you realize just how close Halle Berry and Dix were.
Right.
And that he was willing to share that with her.
And no, I get you there. Then you've also got that scene not long after where Bruce Willis catches Jimmy doing coke in his bathroom, and he goes on this like tirade, like they took my career, like the NFL or whatever organization exists in this movie, like because like my knees are fucked up, like I had to start using painkillers, like they took my health and my life from me. And for me, like that scene and the previous scene where he's telling Joe about his wife and daughter dying, those emotional moments, like those are very Shane Black to me because Shane Black's stuff gets into some dark shit. And those to me have more impact than any of the like big explosions and things like that. And that you see in the film.
Well, and just
like
to
those,
talk about
those are more interesting to me.
Well, and what's weird is I think this movie would have had more of an impact on me if they had not like dated the movie, because I think they say that Jimmy only played the 89 to 90 season. Is that am I correct?
That sounds
on
right.
That?
Yeah, that's
the only reason that scene ties together with me, and not to be funny, is because Daniel Harris comes out and says, "Hey, you were the reason my dad like had a passion for football. Like you were his favorite player." And that's what makes the last two scenes work. Because when he storms in with this righteous indignation about his coke use and stuff, it kind of feels like, I don't know, passe and boring to me.
But to me, it makes it feel like he's like betrayed. He feels betrayed.
Right.
One of his heroes would.
His
right.
whole thing
again,
is that
we find that out later.
Constantly...
As soon as we find out that he's put Jimmy on this pedestal, that's when that scene works for me.
Yeah.
And I question, and I get that it's not Shane Black's fault in terms of how this script turned out, but I question the use of doing that retroactively, if that makes sense.
I think another thing that Shane Black does, we haven't hit on too much yet either, is that he's also tackling, and Justin, you kind of touched on it for a second, is like, besides the characters and these moments are like what their motivation is, he always seems to have these settings that seem to fit, that almost seem prescient, like to like what's going on. Like at this time, like, I mean, the time that this movie was made is like the time that baseball had kind of fucking fallen apart, right? Like I think football, like
I am glad you said that, Gary, because the entire time I'm watching this movie, I'm like, why the fuck would they think that football is going to go down this road? But that's a great point.
This is like the Pete Rose shit.
This is like the Pete Rose shit. It's like, I think that was like 89 or 88 or something like that.
Yeah.
With Pete Rose. So he's like gambling on sports and stuff. But I think it's the time that even football and everybody's like come through with now, that like where they're starting to treat athletes as commodities or like just like property, like in these sports industries, these rich guys and that sort of thing. And like Shane Black is like I mean, maybe he just found the right niche to fit it into or whatever. But I feel like even in The Long Kiss Goodnight, which we're going to talk about, that he does it again almost with like government setting up plots to like destroy things. So it's like, it's interesting to see him even here. Like he's taken this great American sport that like everybody loves and like this dark, seedy side of it that like, yeah, like Dix is this character who's been like run dry and like he's just tossed to the side because he's no good anymore. And you know, like these athletes are just pawns in a game that these rich fuckers are playing, you know, that have all these other things going on besides gambling and everything else. Like, there's just so many levels to this thing. It's not just a fun Americana thing.
Well, it's wild to watch this in a modern setting because as we saw from a historical perspective, football just got bigger and bigger and bigger. The opposite of what happened to baseball. So I get why Shane Black or whomever thought, oh, this thing's going to happen to football as well because it just happened to baseball, and we saw this happen to baseball. I mean, who won the World Series last year?
I don't.
Do you know? Exactly. Yeah. But I guarantee most people know who won the Super Bowl because the Super Bowl is one of the biggest television events.
I do know
it
was the Dodgers, by the way, just for our listeners. Okay.
Don't fucking care because they beat the Braves and it's bullshit.
Well, it's just matters.
If you had asked me what was happening in Batman right now, I got you, man.
Oh, I got you too. I will talk all about Tiny and scripts, but no, but I think it's interesting to watch this from a modern perspective because football did become bigger. So it does for us, we can kind of put ourselves in that time frame. And this is interesting to talk about a couple of older movies because I know that Justin, you're a big fan of the older film of like films past and the great films of the era. And Justin, I know you too. Todd, I assume you are.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I know your film oeuvre as much, but to go back to a period where that might happen. Yeah. From someone who's watching this in 2020, it's very difficult, especially seeing where football is now, where it's one of the biggest sports in the country, and the idea that ratings are getting lower, and you know we got to do this all we got to legalize sports gambling because we got to get football big. Just from a 2020 perspective, seems so silly. But Gary, because you brought up the Pete Rose thing and what was happening at the time, it's. For me, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. And immediately that movie's more prescient. If that makes any sense.
I mean, I would say that I don't have as difficult a time believing it even now. Just because I mean, sports are the first thing to like, you know, I don't want to start a whole other discussion, but
no, but I mean, you hear
as soon
about
as things
$100
start
million
getting
like
woke, the corporate sports entities will start getting woke. They'll start. I just think there's other areas where they could try to monopolize or like try to capitalize on something.
Sure,
going
I'm
on.
talking specifically. I'm not talking about any politics. I'm not talking about anything else other than people watching the game. And this
well,
whole
I think we're
movie's
also
predicated on people
desensitized
watching the
now. We
game.
know. Yeah, things have gotten better, but are they always? I don't know. Are they still the best for the athletes and that sort of thing? I don't know. But at this time, yeah, everybody believed it was some kind of wholesome game that's just being played, and then something like baseball comes along, and you find out like, oh, this great American pastime is not just the best folks competing, and it's just, you know, there's a lot of money behind it. There's a lot of manipulation. There's a lot of like buying and selling of people, that sort of thing. So it's kind of darker side to it. I don't doubt that that's still
It sounds
going
like
on
you're
in some
describing
ways.
slavery, Gary.
Oh, there's yeah. You should check out The League. There's a whole thing about that in fantasy where they're like buying and trading people. It's kinda funny.
I've watched The League. I just want to put you on the spot there, but no,
it's 100% like slavery.
I do agree. I mean, it's weird because if we're talking about 1991 and specifically in that area or that era, it's a much more believable that for me is the problem with this film is I feel like The Last Boy Scout lives and dies in the time period it was made more so than anything Shane Black has written before or after.
Man, I still love it. I don't care. I think it's a lot of fun. It is.
No, I'm not saying that, Gary, at all. I'm talking about just the actual essence of what's going on. Because I love it too.
Based on the plot.
I'm with
Based
you.
on the plot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Look,
yeah. I mean,
if Danielle Harris is in it, I'm there. So I'm with you.
The action is still good. I mean, it still got a rise out of me. Some of the stuff was still intense. Some of the stuff when fucking Milo dies
Danielle
at the end,
Harris
I still
get a rise
like
out of
sat
you,
on the
Gary?
edge of my seat and went, "Holy shit, movie! What the fuck?" Like Milo gets shot up like 800 times and then falls into a helicopter plane.
It's the most Hollywood death you can think of. So Scary Fred Armisen gets shot up by all these machine guns and then falls off this, I guess, like light fixture from the top
the
of
scaffolding,
the NFL stadium
into a helicopter.
The stadium lights, a light fixture. There's a light fixture. There was some sort of chandelier in the LA arena.
Yes.
A table lamp Milo was standing on.
You know what I mean.
We are sports fans.
Yeah.
Sports.
But the
Yay,
thing
sports.
is, I mean, it's wild because that character you can tell was the most rewritten because he goes from being kind of this cool killer to I'm going to rape your daughter if you don't like go with what I'm saying.
Well, I don't think that he was the most rewritten. I think it was that a lot of his stuff was from the original script was taken out because in the original script he was pretty fucked up. He was a pretty scary character who you would believe as that final character. A lot of the stuff in between, I think, was excised from what was originally written, if that makes sense.
It does make sense.
He
was
was written as a guy who was involved in the production of snuff films, where a hulking brute would come in and chop up a woman with a chainsaw. Like that was in the original script.
Right.
So that makes more sense to me than him randomly going to, I'm going to rape your 13-year-old daughter.
Right.
If
but
you don't.
The character from the
Absolutely.
original script,
I'm just talking about the film
you would
as we
totally
see it.
believe that. Yes. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So despite the star power of this film and the hype, because the fact that Shane Black sold this movie for $1.75 million was a big deal at the time. There was a lot of hype.
Good for
around
him.
this.
That's all I have to say.
Despite that, this film ended up underperforming at the box office when it was released in December of 1991. Grossed about $7.9 million its opening weekend. It would go on to make about $114.5 million worldwide. So it did okay.
Not bad.
It did decent. You know, it wasn't a flop by any means. It underperformed based on what they had expected, based on how they, the star power and what they had spent on the script. but it did well, and it wasn't a blockbuster, but it did well enough to kind of help Bruce Willis regain some star power after the disaster that was Hudson Hawk.
And it did well at home too, didn't it?
It did pretty well on home video as well. Yeah. And reviews upon release were mixed, but it has kind of gained a cult following over the years. And a lot of people now regard it as one of the best films of Tony Scott's career. I mean, this movie is more revisited, I think, than
That's a tough call.
True Romance is number one for me. Will always
100%. But The Fan is super fun.
And I think I have gone on record on like the second podcast episode me and Gary ever produced, I think, was on Top Gun. And I will go on record as saying that I think Top Gun fucking sucks. But Days of Thunder was a huge hit at the time.
But it was.
More talked about now, 30 years later.
I honestly couldn't tell you anything about Days of Thunder. It's been so long since I've seen it.
I know that Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman are in it. I know that there's some cars racing, but I don't remember much about
He's
it.
the Hardy's car, isn't he?
Dick Trickle. Dick Trickle,
I
baby.
think he's the Hardy's car because that's what I remember from the time period. I remember a Hardy's Happy Meal having a Hardy's car.
So, but here's the thing. People like this movie now. Like if you can read reviews of this now, and a lot of times,
I get it.
A lot of even recent reviews will say, this is very indicative of Tony Scott's style and things like that. People they'll look at it and they'll see the DNA of the film where they can see Shane Black's voice in there.
I think it's easy to see. Yeah.
But I also think it's more for like people like you, me, like everyone on the show, or maybe people listening,
movie nerds. But then if you search, there are some people, Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are some people that have written recent reviews about this that don't love it.
Yeah, Justin, as we always do now on the Cinema Shock podcast, there are some people that get really, really irritated with this film. In fact, they get so irritated that it almost sounds like somebody needs a nap. All right, I got a couple here this time. This one is a 1-star review from Amazon.com, and it says, "A big, loud, stupid piece of garbage. Last Boy Scout is the kind of movie indie fans point to when they bemoan the lack of quality in Hollywood films. It's a gratuitously violent, utterly offensive, and sexist pile of trash that shows why Tony Scott should not be allowed to direct another film for the rest of his life. When Top Gun is the finest film you've ever done, it says volumes about your talent or lack thereof." This was written in 2004.
I was about to ask you.
Bruce Willis does his usual tough guy routine. David Wayans shows his usual bad taste in picking projects. And the whole sordid mess reeks of idiocy from top to bottom. If you like foul-mouthed kids, women portrayed as either philanderers or crackheads, lots of car crashes, lots of things blowing up and bodies flying around, and tons of gratuitous foul language with no intelligent dialogue to go along with it, then Last Boy Scout is for you. If, however, you have even a little bit of taste, stay as far away from this clinker as you can.
That review does not drive me from this movie.
That honestly makes me want to watch it.
Yeah, that makes this movie sound way cooler than it is, and I like this movie. I really do.
It's super violent and they cuss a lot.
Shane Black really hit his stride with the mindless regurgitation of his own lethal weapon. Did he actually write this script with a word processor or wipe it out of his butthole on a roll of toilet paper? There are more unnecessary F-bombs in this than there are flying bullets, crashing cars, and plot holes combined. Only, unlike a film like, say, Get Shorty, there's very little wit to go with the endless profanity. Sure, teenage boys and IQ-challenged redneck men, and of course Quentin Tarantino, will have found Willis and Wayne's profane quips and one-liners hilarious, but I just found it to be tiresome and stupidly unnecessary dialogue, especially when the kid is spewing it. Nice touch there by all involved. But then again, the whole movie is an unnecessary spew. Stupid plot to do with corruption in pro football and politics, familial dysfunction, infidelity, and a couple of gun-packing losers caught in the middle of it all conspires to make one of the most implausible, noisy, badly filmed, and edited action crap fests of all time. Tony Scott can bite me with his pumped-up, testosterone-charged, colored light filter, sloppy direction, and camera work, and Shane Black can bite me twice for the hackneyed piece of shit he called a script. I wouldn't even begin to get into the disturbing misogyny littered throughout this waste of film. A most unenjoyable night at the movies. Why isn't there a -10 rating option?
What year is that from?
That's from 2006.
Really?
Oh, Jesus
okay.
Christ.
Like there are parts of that I can definitely agree with. But first of all, the kids.
I'm tired of people being offended by people saying "fuck."
That annoys the hell out of me. Like it's. Look, I get that if you're not a big fan of profanity, like, but you're also seeing an R-rated movie. Like,
I'm a big fan of profanity.
I am too. But also, a kid saying profanity it's usually the best part of the movie.
Yeah, it's great. Danielle Harris is great in this. So Roger Ebert, who is a better critic than any of the people that you just read,
yes,
he gave it his review is sort of hilariously mixed in that he talks about how well the film works, but also how vile he finds the violence in the film. It's pretty funny. I would definitely recommend looking up looking up
Roger Ebert's review
of this movie, because it's like he talks a lot about things he doesn't like, but he's like, yeah, but it works. Like they made it work.
Well, and that's what I like about Ebert is Ebert was. He was one of my favorite writers about film in general because he could see that.
Even when I disagree with Roger Ebert, I love his writing because I see it as coming from a place where he cares.
Yes,
Pauline Kael is another one like that. Like Pauline Kael, I think is one of the best film critics to ever live, and a lot of time I do not agree with her views, but I'm like, yeah, but you're making a good point here.
But the thing about both Pauline and Roger Ebert is that they were good writers. And like, even if I don't agree with you, I can see where you're coming from, and at least you're doing it eloquently, and I appreciate that.
It goes
Roger Ebert, like he ended up giving The Last Boy Scout. He does his movies on a 4-star scale. He ended up giving The Last Boy Scout 3 stars, so not bad.
Nice.
Yeah.
But also saying in his review, he's at the very end of his review, he says, I'm giving it 3 stars, but as for my thumb. The famous thumbs up, thumbs down. As for my thumb, I'll use it and my forefinger to hold my nose.
Ouch.
That's so weird. Well, he's just like, it's a good movie. I don't want it to be, but it is.
He's like, I don't want to admit it, but they did a good job, even though I think that
that's how a lot of people felt at the time. They felt like they got away with something. And to this day, I mean, it finds a new audience all the time. I think it's a cult film. I think we're going to see a nice release of it someday. I think we should.
I hope we do.
I agree.
Edgar Wright. I saw quotes from Edgar Wright saying,
Hot Fuzz is hugely 100% influenced by this movie.
But I think we can. I think all 4 of us can say that we have definitely seen movies that we very much enjoyed, but would also be very hesitant to be like, "Oh, this movie's great."
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So Ebert, in one of his criticisms in his review, was that the film is, and this is a quote, vilely misogynistic. But I actually don't agree with that. Like his argument was that the women in it are treated shitty. And it's true.
I honestly, I can see where Ebert's coming from.
Well, here's the thing. I agree that the movie does treat women like shit. Yeah. But it also treats everyone else like shit. But
at the same time, from the perspective of the characters.
Okay, but here's the thing, Joe. Like this is based on his review and his argument for it. Yes, Joe does curse at his 13-year-old daughter, but she also curses back at him. Like Jim, he also, and then Joe also curses at Jimmy, and he curses at Sarah, and they all give as much as they take. Everyone treats everyone like shit in this movie.
And his daughter also saves the fucking day in a certain
That's
point.
True. She is sort of the hero at one point.
No, I agree with that. But the perspective of certain characters like have a style of like, oh yeah, and women are terrible. Like that is a whole scene where it's like that. This is one of like the sun will rise, blah blah blah, and women will lie to you. Like, I do see like that. That is a problem with this movie.
Sure, yeah, and I'm not going to disagree with you. So as for Black, here's what he says in retrospect about The Last Boy Scout. There's a quote from Black. That was the movie that made me decide I should try directing myself someday. Not because Tony did a bad job, but because there were so many things that I wish had played differently. What you got was a movie that was occasionally sparked by the talent involved into brilliance, but overshadowed by the general sense of a project not reaching its potential. I thought someday I'm going to take on a movie like this and fight to make it the way that I want. And he would get that chance. Shane Black would get that chance about 14 years after this movie. But before then, before he would get a chance to direct his own film, he would end up breaking his own record for how much a screenplay could sell for.
Yeah, because did we even mention that he held the record for 67 days?
67? Who broke it?
At the end of this script, selling this script, Shane Black had the highest selling screenplay of all time for 67 days when Carolco, who was apparently itching to shit money, bought Basic Instinct from Joe Esterhaus for $3 million.
Joe Esterhaus was a powerhouse in Hollywood for like 3 years.
Supposedly he like hated Shane Black when this happened. Like he was mad at him and he would call him. Shane Black says directly, this is a quote, he says, Esterhaus used to call me and wake me up at night saying, I just sold something for more money than you did. Ha ha. And he was always have to be like, Joe, I don't care, man.
I don't care. Shane Black would never cared about the amount. You know?
Yeah, no, he even says that like in a lot of these interviews you see with him where people are like, you're an inspiration, like you helped spark this thing. You as screenwriter started getting a portion of things and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, look, I don't want to be responsible either way for how much somebody gets paid for something. I got mine and that's what I'm trying to do. But he's like, at the end of the day, if your movie's going to make $150 million and I get $2 million out of it, I think that's more than fair.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of how his attitude was.
So before we move on, I know we've heard a lot from Miles. I feel like Todd has been a little quiet. I want to know what you feel, Todd. I want you to give you a couple, like 2 minutes to give me your opinion on The Last Boy Scout.
Well, as I mentioned last week, I have never seen this. So this was first viewing for me. And so the opening scene hits really hard. From out of nowhere, I didn't realize that was Billy Blanks. It makes me want to go watch it again. The fact that, there were a lot of similarities between this or Bruce Willis's character and, in this and Die Hard. So I see a lot of that. I see a lot of that coming down, but I really dig the mismatched team,
which is what Shane Black did in Lethal Weapon and what he will do in The Longest Good Night and Kiss Kiss Bang Bang.
Right.
So and the Nice Guys and
that seems to be his go-to formula, and it's working for him. In looking at Bruce Willis's character, The Last Boy Scout, it's kind of I see having worked in a little bit with within law enforcement and knowing some guys that have had some heavier assignments, I really was attracted to the psyche of Hollenbeck, that he can't let this go. He can't let certain things go. And that's part of what has sent his life spiraling, is his inability to be a husband, to be pissed off. Like his wife is just like, look, set it aside and tell me, go fuck yourself, Sarah, or fuck you, Sarah. Like, but he's such a Boy Scout that he can't let that go. And it's, him getting paired with this guy who was forced to let a bunch of things go with the death of his family, the loss of his career, his addiction to painkillers and other drugs. Like them being paired together, like it's like in Demolition Man when he's like, hey, clean yourself up and you get a little dirty, you know, but I think that's what's so fascinating about this. And I think Justin, you touched on this, or Gary or Miles, I can't remember. It's not the cars blowing up, and it's not the quippy one-liners. It's these characters going through this very psychologically traumatic experience and then having to accomplish this thing. The thing is almost inconsequential. It's watching them work through it with someone who is not their ideal choice for a partner. And this is rapidly becoming one of my favorite movies. I really, really enjoyed this. And
I love that. I love that. And Todd, you're 100% right. I mean, that's the thing I wanted to latch onto. And that's the thing I wanted to constantly like shake people and say, and maybe just because we're the only ones who seem to get this sometimes, I'm sure all four of us see this, but when people kept comparing him with Riggs, I wanted to be like, look, man, like, no, he's a different dude. Like Riggs is at the end of his rope. He's suicidal. He's got ideation. Like he's not okay. Like Houndback is just, he's sick of being Superman in a world that doesn't want one. And like, that's kind of what he is. And
what's interesting about that, Gary, is I think that's what's interesting about his character is that he's not Superman, but always saw himself as Superman.
Well, he tries, but I mean, his mentality is the Boy Scout. Like his mentality is like, I got to do the right thing. Like I got to try to do the right thing. It gets him so far that he's willing to damage himself faster than he's willing to damage anyone else. I think he takes the Halle Berry case strictly like when the guy hands it off to, it's just because there's a girl in danger. Like he's just like, you know, it doesn't pay great, but here it is. Like this girl just needs some help. She's a stripper. Like, but somebody's
I wish the movie communicated that more, because I agree with you. I think
that's what I'm saying. Maybe it is maybe it just didn't pan out this way in the movie.
Right. No, because I think that pathos is 100% where that character comes from. I would have loved to have seen that more in the movie. Because I like you guys. I really do enjoy this movie. I have a lot of fun with it.
I 100% see that this is what Tony Scott saw in the movie. What?
You can kind of see the potential of the movie.
Yeah.
And
I think this is what Tony Scott saw.
To not be able to see that potential realized on screen.
I think Tony Scott saw this. He saw that script, and that's 100%. What he wanted. That's exactly what he wanted to do. The problem is they ended up in this situation where they hired a hard-headed actor who was in the middle of a bunch of shit. They had a producer who was in a bunch of shit. A producer that Shane Black trusted, by the way, but a producer who is, by all accounts, you know, just no nonsense. I want what I want, and I want bigger, and I want better, and he should be the producer for Michael Bay. Like I even saw, Todd, you referenced Demolition Man. I even had a quote from Sylvester Stallone here somewhere in my notes. He says, talking about Joel Silver, says he's insane.
Did Joe Silver do Daylight?
I don't know, but I know he definitely did Demolition Man.
I'm excited about doing Daylight for this podcast because I assume that I will be asked back for because Daniel Harris is also in that movie.
The Stallone quote from Demolition Man is, he's insane with long, horrible fits of sanity. He says, he's like a fighter pilot riding as a passenger. As soon as you hit a little bit of turbulence, he's right away going to throw the guy out the window and take over steering.
Well, it's wild because, I mean, both Shane Black and Tony Scott say the original script for this movie is better, which I think Justin mentioned before, or maybe you did, Gary. So they both agree that they had a good solid footing. So both these guys clearly liked each other, clearly liked what they wanted to do. But like you said, Gary, with the amount of egos involved in the production of this movie, you know, things got snafu'd real quick.
Well, I think Tony Scott, the thing with Tony Scott is, from everything I've been able to check out about him, is, I mean, he was enamored by, this was a slow burn detective story. Like, I think that's what he wanted. And it sounds counterintuitive based on a lot of Tony Scott's stuff, but I think Tony Scott was his own worst enemy, and maybe he's worth a whole other series. That he was just, he kind of had that Michael Bay thing going for him. And so like people just saw that he had an eye. Like he started out as this commercial guy and could shoot things commercially really well. And so like that's what paid his bills. And so he was hoping to get on this project and do something different.
But you look at something like True Romance and you look like Crimson Tide and The Fan, and I just feel like he's a guy who had a great eye for action, but also just had a great eye in general. He could tell a thriller.
I think Tony Scott is a great director. I think Tony 100%. Scott is especially a great visual director.
Yeah. I'm still saying he's great. I'm just thinking he didn't get to make the movie he wanted to make.
I agreed. And that
I don't think anyone made the movie they wanted to make.
Because he was early in his career and he was at the he was making this movie with Bruce Willis and Joel Silver hanging over the whole production. You know, like he wasn't the guy he didn't have the clout to get the movie done that needed to be done. So Tony Scott's next movie after this would be the Tarantino scripted True Romance, which features a film producer character played by Saul Rubinek, who comes across suspiciously close to Joel Silver. That character is Tony Scott would never work with Joel Silver again. But if you watch True Romance and you see the guy who's making body bags too in True Romance, like you're like, that is Joel Silver. That is his commentary on that character.
Well, to be fair, Bruce Willis also never worked with Joel Silver again after this. This movie even killed their relationship.
Yeah, I mean, Joel Silver would do fine because in 1999 he would do The Matrix, and he did well.
Well, it's going to come back up because his success there is going to help Shane Black get what he wants in that time period. But we'll have to get there.
So Shane Black will get a chance to direct a film himself 14 years later, in 2005, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. That's a movie we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks. But between The Last Boy Scout and that film, he would have another screenplay that he would sell for another record-breaking price. And that's the Rennie Harlin directed 1996 film, The Long Kiss Goodnight. And I don't know if you've seen this one, Todd. Have you seen The Long Kiss Goodnight?
I have not. My wife has chastised me greatly for it.
She's seen it and you haven't?
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen it since high school, dude. So I'm excited.
My wife had never seen it until last year. We watched it on Christmas Eve last year because I was really excited to watch it again because I loved this movie when it came out, and it fucking blew her mind because it's really good. And I'm not a huge Rennie Harlin fan. I think he is. With me. Huh?
He's hit or miss with me.
He's hit or miss. Like I think Die Hard 2
Neither
sucks.
are audiences, Justin.
What?
I said it. Neither are our audiences big fans.
Yeah, friend of the show, Craig Carson hates him so much.
I mean, I don't like a lot of his movies. I think he sucks a lot of time. He's a director.
Well, I will say this for our Black Christmas portion of this thing. I mean, Shane Black, here he is. He's gone into his deep depression. He hit 2 years solid after his first big successes and disappeared. And you think after this one, maybe things work out. But no, now he's going bigger this time. Now he's gonna keep going up, and he's Icarus flying towards the sun, my friends. The story of Shane Black will continue.
It's a his career is a wild story. So I'm really glad we're getting to explore it because we're kind of going into a movie next week that I think is very good, but from what I recall, did not do very well at the box office. And then we're going to go into a movie that sort of revitalized the brand of Shane Black and got him working on fucking Marvel movies and shit.
Yeah. I mean, you know that he eventually directed Iron Man 3, so he ended up okay. But but there's a process here we're working through.
He's got to grow into that. So that's it for The Last Boy Scout. Miles, thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
Thank you for having me.
Todd, thank you so much for joining us once again this week.
It is my pleasure as always.
I think this is
Todd, I had
15 in a row that Todd's been here.
Yeah, we're happy to have Todd. I had the thought watching this movie that I would almost accept it if he changed his catchphrase to "fast forward eats the tape."
Todd's never changing his catchphrase no matter how much we hate it. Well, Miles, let our audience know where you and your podcast can be found on the
You
internet.
can find us on wherever podcasts are downloaded. You can look at Twitter at The More You Nerd, Facebook, The More You Nerd. You can find us pretty much anywhere at The More You Nerd.
How about you, Todd?
I can be reached at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond.
You still got those t-shirts for sale?
Yes, COVID comedy t-shirts are for sale.
Speaking of t-shirts,
everybody search for E is 4. Plug them.
Yes.
Also, go support Ginger Kibbe, a buddy of mine from the comic book shows back in the day. Unfortunately, has caught COVID. He's an older gentleman, and his medical bills are outstanding, we'll say.
Say that name again.
Ginger Kibbe. It's Kibby. Ginger Kibbe. He just briefly about him. He if he's a big name and if they are a big name in the comic book industry, odds are Kibbe works security for them, so he knows most of the comic book industry. If you've been to a comic book convention in the last 15-20 years, odds are you've seen him. He's huge. He's a really big guy, but he's an absolute teddy bear. One of our great friends, and unfortunately he got COVID, and so he's they're keeping him sedated, and his family is has a GoFundMe campaign out there, and they are raising some money. So we wish him the best, and if you can throw a couple bucks his way, if you're looking to if you're looking to help folks, consider Ginger Kibbe, Kibby.
Absolutely. I'll try to find that GoFundMe and link
shortly,
it in our show description.
Last thing I'll plug is the Computer Resume podcast, a new Star Trek podcast coming soon.
Coming soon from your friend Todd A. Davis.
Yep.
Gary, how about you? Where can you be found on the internet?
Well, I don't have nearly the interesting stuff to say. I'm just at This Is Gary Horne on everything.
And
that's
at
not
the
true.
NWA pod.
Yeah, come on, Gary.
Yeah, but by the time this airs, that might have changed. So
Well,
we'll see.
if it has, then we'll link it in the show description. And next week, we're going to be talking about, of course, The Long Kiss Goodnight. You can find a link to where you can stream that at cinemashock.net. Speaking of t-shirts, Todd has t-shirts, but we also have Cinema Shock t-shirts on the way. Hopefully by the time this episode airs, we will have those live. Just go to cinemashock.net, click on shop, and you'll find those where you can support the show that way as well. I'm at Justin_Bishop. The show is at Cinema Shock Shock. That's right.
Yeah.
Cinema Shock on Twitter and Instagram, or just find us on Facebook or cinemashock.net. And until next week,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
be excellent to each other.
Johnny has the keys, but Danielle Harris has the keys to Gary's heart.
Perfect.
I love it.